There was this kid, before I knew his name now, this kid was sitting under our tent at track. We asked him to move. He started getting aggressive and talking reckless. And my brother stepped in and said, "You need to move." And he's like, "Make me move." Austin grabbed his backpack. The kid, I tried to whip around as fast as I could, but I didn't see the stab.
Video from WFAA in Texas. Tragedy at a track meet. A teenage football life cut short. His family says he died in his twin brother's arms. The suspect, according to police, was a fellow high school athlete who allegedly brought a knife to a track meet and changed so many lives, allegedly, in the course of doing so. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. It is hard to make sense of this story, and just wait until I tell you what the suspect in this case reportedly has told police about an alleged murder that happened in the middle of the week at a high school track meet in the middle of the day in Texas. This is Austin Metcalf. His family says he died in his twin brother's arms after he was stabbed at this track meet in Frisco, Texas, near Dallas. He was 17 years old, and his future on the field and in life was so bright. He was a junior at Memorial High School. He played football there. His dad says last season he was team MVP, and he had a 4.0 GPA in the classroom. According to his ex account, he was getting looks to play at the next level and by some big schools. Here he is at a recruiting event for the Arkansas Razorbacks. They play in the SEC. If you know college football, that is as big as it gets. He was a multi-sport athlete, and he was also on his high school's track team, which is who he was competing for on April 2nd at this stadium in his hometown of Frisco, about 40 minutes from Dallas. And if you've ever run track, you know these meets, there's a lot of downtime in between the events. Each team typically has its own spot to hang out, and Austin was reportedly under a tent with his teammates when rain started falling on Wednesday. KXAS TV in Dallas has the police report that states that the suspect, who goes to a different high school, was under Metcalf's team's tent, and he was told to move. Witnesses say the suspect then unzipped a bag, he reaches in and told Metcalf, quote, "Touch me and see what happens." That's when witnesses say Austin Metcalf got up and grabbed the suspect, who then allegedly took out a knife and stabbed Austin in the chest. Austin's twin brother told WFAA TV this.
And my brother stepped in and said, "You need to move." He's like, "Make me move." Austin grabbed his backpack. The kid, I tried to whip around as fast as I could, but I didn't see the stab. But then I look at my brother, and then I'm not going to talk about the rest.
Metcalf's family says that Austin died in his brother's arms. Here's a picture of the boys with their dad. This is the suspect. His name is Karmelo Anthony. He is facing a charge of murder. He is being held on $1 million bond. Even though I'm using the term alleged in this story because all defendants, all suspects are innocent until proven guilty, Anthony reportedly is not using that term. He told police, quote, "I'm not alleged, I did it." That is according to the arrest warrant obtained by KXAS TV. And according to the warrant, Anthony appears to think that he was in the right for allegedly killing Metcalf, claiming self-defense. We'll get into why his self-defense argument may not work in court in just a moment.
Karmelo Anthony, class of 2025, Centennial High School, Frisco, Texas.
Anthony was also a football player. This was him mic'd up for a tournament that was posted on YouTube, and he linked to it on his X account. Anthony's high school was just about 7 miles from where Metcalf went to high school. It appears up until Wednesday, August 2nd, Anthony had somewhat of a bright future as well, as social media shows that he was getting offers to play college football. At least his social media claimed that. Like these Division III schools in Texas and Louisiana, and this small school in Kansas. On Huddle, which is a social media site for football recruits, he wrote, quote, "God has shown you the right path, just take it." That was in his bio. Now he's facing the possibility of never being on a football field again, or frankly being a free person ever again, because he is charged with murder. We saw a user write to him on X saying, quote, "Ruined your whole future, dude." Now, if the allegations are true, if he's convicted, frankly, the only future that truly matters in this story is that of Austin Metcalf, a future that was ended, and the future of his family and how they heal after what happened at this track meet on Wednesday this week. Austin's dad has a GoFundMe page. It has raised nearly $200,000. At the time of this recording, the page includes pictures of Austin, his dad, and his twin brother from when they were young. His dad writes, quote, "He was a leader of men. His smile would light up the room. His passion for football was unbelievable." And it's hard not to get emotional looking at this picture of a dad and his sons just fishing looking out at the water at a pond, and to think of everything that was taken away by an alleged decision this week. On that GoFundMe page, his dad finishes by saying, quote, "We will all remember him for the way he impacted others' lives. I love you forever, son. It's not goodbye. It's see you later. God will take care of us till we meet again. RIP. Love, Dad." Austin's last post on social media was on March 31st. He wrote on X, quote, "Faith that God got me and my work will pay off." Join us now to talk about this case. It certainly has a lot of people talking is trial attorney Bridget Williams, who joins us from Dallas, Texas. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know that this has been headline news in your city since it happened earlier this week. At this point, what are some of the questions that you have based off the information that we've been able to get so far?
Well, one, thank you so much for having me. I would say some of the questions that are running through my mind is just like, what is it that caused such a dispute to happen in the first place? What is it that could have caused it to have led to this in the first place? And also, just I feel like there needs to be some type of just education for individuals for what is it that is self-defense. What is it that it really means for self-defense? Because in a situation like this escalated so quickly from one person thinking that he was defending himself, and in fact, he wasn't.
Bridget, you bring up a good point because I think it can be a very delicate part of these conversations and stories we cover to say that there was more than one life that was damaged in events like this, because there's nothing worse than what the Metcalf family went through. They will never see their son ever again. And then you look at this suspect and you know, there's questions about why you would even bring a knife to a track meet or anything like that. But how do you balance that? And maybe it isn't even balancing it. I struggle with it to say, you know, the idea that Karmelo Anthony, he had college offers to go play football, and then this decision on this day, April 2nd, at a track meet over something that probably at the end of the day never mattered at all. He likely could spend the rest of his life behind bars, and his family, who might have thought that they had a future college football player in their house, now very well may end up for the majority of their lives having to go visit him in a prison.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Something like this that just evolved and snowballed, that's what it seems like to me, snowballed over something that may have just been some high school students getting into some type of disagreement. And so the issue is that once that disagreement again begins to snowball, what is appropriate for self-defense? Whenever we're into just a oral disagreement, then that transfers over to a physical disagreement. How does it transfer then to a knife? And so, and under Texas law, you have to provide equal or lesser value, generally, so force, whenever we're talking about self-defense. Is it reasonable and is it proportionate to that of what the perpetrator initiated before? Because in this situation, the suspect is stating he told the other person pretty much, "Don't touch me." And that person did, in fact, touch him, and then he pulled out a knife. So yes, maybe there was some issues there where we talked about physical altercations, but that doesn't give you the right or the responsibility to respond back with a knife. It has to be reasonable and proportionate.
How do, once you get to a trial portion, actually be able to figure that out? Of, you know, you'll have what he will say, and let's say if he goes with the self-defense argument when we get to that point, but then you're going to have witnesses that will lay out the narrative. And how do you get to the point where you figure out, okay, this is what people are saying what happened, and then this is the law, and you merge the two together to figure out what the appropriate punishment should be?
Yeah, I think that actually starts way before a trial setting. That would start really in the discovery aspect. So when we are looking through the discovery, and we'll be able to see what are the affidavits from each of the witnesses stating, what did the actual suspect himself state, because he made statements that were not where someone asked him any questions. He volunteered statements. And so all of that information is used even prior to trial. And so the state will be using that, all of those things combined in what we call totality of the circumstances, to offer him some type of offer punishment range. And so so that is, I think it starts way before trial. It starts way before that. And the state will, again, make an offer based off of all of those issues combined.
In a lot of these cases where someone makes a self-defense argument, and I feel like I don't even understand when these cases come up from state to state, where you would think someone feels, hey, I feel threatened, I have this weapon on me. In this case, it was allegedly a knife. Some cases we see someone who has a firearm, and in that moment they make this decision and they say, hey, I was defending myself. And then the police will say that's actually not what self-defense actually is. How common in the situations that you've dealt with in your career, is there just a complete lack of awareness from a suspect or a defendant about what actually is self-defense?
It happens more often than you think. Here in Texas now, most people are allowed to carry a gun or a firearm. So we all know that. However, when we do those things, we need to also be educating ourselves, especially students as well. And students, and I would say everyone, really needs to educate themselves on when it is appropriate for self-defense. So we have several cases I've seen in my career where someone may have brandished a firearm driving down the interstate, just showing someone else a firearm if someone may have cut them off on the interstate or something, and that is not allowed. Like, you cannot do that. You can be charged. And so I think just educating ourselves on what the law says self-defense is, in combination with getting a firearm if you're going to get one, that is really important, because you want to make sure that you are protecting yourself, and then that you are making sure that you're doing everything proper so you won't be charged in something going down the line.
Yeah, I look at this case, very different situation, but like Daniel Penny in New York, who was the man on a subway who claimed self-defense when there was someone having a mental health episode, and that person ends up losing their life. Of course, stand your ground laws in Florida are always a hot topic when a case comes up involving those. Why is it that it seems like from state to state we have a difficult time across the board understanding what self-defense actually looks like?
It's difficult because every state has their own rules, right? So every state has a different set of self-defense rules. Just like you stated, in Florida, there's stand your ground laws. In Texas, we don't necessarily have that. So here in the state of Texas, again, self-defense has to be reasonable, and it has to be appropriate for exactly what it is that the perpetrator or the other person initiated. And so the important thing to do is, if you're going to be in a state, to inform yourself about the laws of that particular state. Ignorance of the law is not a defense. It never is. It never will be. And so you have to make sure that you are informed in the best way possible, learning as much as possible as you can if you're going to be in a particular state. And so that way you'll know how to protect yourself.
This suspect, Karmelo Anthony, is being held on $1 million bond. He's been charged with murder. I'm sure you've had difficult conversations with people who have been charged with crimes they never thought that they would ever be charged with, people who are not career criminals. What are those conversations like?
Those conversations can sometimes be very difficult. We're having that conversation a lot of times with the actual client, so that could the defendant himself, but also their family, because this situation not only impacts just this one person, but it impacts their families and their lives for a very, very long time. So those conversations can be extremely difficult. This suspect being held on a $1 million bond is not uncommon. I think that that is generally appropriate. In this specific city, Frisco, that is what we call Collin County, they are putting a bond in place because of the offense, right? So the nature of the offense, which is a murder case, is he a danger to himself and to others? In a situation like this, you presented a knife at a physical altercation, you're a danger to others, and you could very well be a danger to yourself. And so I don't foresee a judge going down much lower on the bond. More than likely, his attorney will have a bond hearing asking the court to reduce that bond down if his family cannot afford to post that bond for him. But that would be the next steps for a defense attorney, to try to set a bond hearing to try to get his bond reduced down. However, based on the nature of the offense and his danger, just status to community, to others, with something such of this magnitude, I don't foresee it going down much, much lower.
In cases when it comes to bond, because I know in some cases you might be able to get a bail bondsman, you only have to put down, I think in some states like 10%. I mean,
10%.
realistically, what 10%? What would his family have to put forward if he was to be released on bond ahead of trial?
Yeah, and that's up to him and his family. So here in Texas, you can do what's called a bail bond or a surety bond, where they can get a bail bondsman to post the bond for them, where they would have to pay 10% along with some state fees. That's the norm. Some bail bondsmen charge a little more than that, but they have that as an option. Or they can pay a cash bond. The cash bond is where they would pay the full amount, but then they would get that full amount back once the case is resolved. When you pay the surety bond with the bail bondsman, you never get that money back. That is the money that you pay directly to them. And then the bail bondsman company is responsible, fully responsible. If you don't show back up to court, now they are fully responsible for the full amount of that bond to the court. So the cash bond is the other option where they can pay the full amount directly to the court. The family will get that amount back at the end of the case.
In this suspect, Karmelo Anthony, 17 years old, so technically still a minor being charged as an adult. Why is it in so many cases when someone's close to being 18, even though they're still a juvenile, they are charged as an adult?
It just really just depends. Every case is just such a case by case basis. And then the courts will, the juvenile courts can sometimes just petition to the district courts in order for, based off of the severity of the offense, for that to be tried in a district court or county court at law. This is a severity type of case. I don't see why it's not moving forward in the district court. This is where it needs to be.
What's the timeline if this is something that happened on April 2nd? So I think it was on Wednesday this week. What's the timeline look like to when there eventually could be a trial?
It really just depends. So the cases such as this have no what we call statute of limitations, and so the police department has quite some time to build up their case, and then once they do that, they present it to the DA's office. The DA's office at the felony level then will present that case to a grand jury. The grand jury then decides if there has been enough probable cause, and then moves forward to an actual prosecutor. That time frame could take months. It could technically take years before he actually has a trial date or a court date. So before we get to a trial date, before he gets to a court date. So that process could take months, years before we even get started on moving forward with this case.
And I think of Karmelo Anthony, this isn't someone who I've seen has a criminal record, not like a career criminal, someone who appeared to be had a bright future, on the right track, captain of the football team, had college offers. How much will the court take that into consideration when eventually, if he's found guilty? And listen, he's charged with, there's no worse offense than taking the life of someone else. And Austin Metcalf's family, he's gone forever. So I'm not making light of that, but I do think of, this not being a career criminal and someone in the heat of the moment made a terrible, terrible decision thinking it was self-defense. Could that factor into how much time he potentially could spend in prison?
I think that those things would go into account during the punishment phase. So not necessarily during the guilt innocence phase. And that's if this even moves forward to a trial. So let's go back a little bit. Let's say that they decide that they're not going to move forward with a trial setting and they're going to try to work out some type of agreement with the prosecutors. The prosecutors will then be able to take that into account in some type of mitigating circumstances, stating just all the things that you just said. Maybe he was a great student, straight A's, about to go to college and was a great athlete, all these different things. And so those are things that can be taken into account there. If he moves forward with a trial setting, that does not go into effect, in my opinion, for the guilt innocence phase. It's either, did you meet the elements that for murder? Yes, no. And then once that is confirmed or not confirmed, if it is confirmed, then those things will go into account for the punishment phase, which is separate. And so a lot of times the defense attorney will be building up the case there for the punishment phase to try to reduce the punishment as much as possible.
How likely is it, with what you know, maybe just what you know from what prosecutors are like in the county where Frisco is located, and also the evidence at this point that it seems that the authorities have, that they would do a plea deal or negotiate a plea deal, as opposed to just saying, we have pretty clear evidence that you did this, we're going to take this to trial and make sure you face the full extent of the law?
Yeah, I think that the prosecutors in most counties around Texas, around the Dallas-Fort Worth area, are going to be somewhat reasonable. They're going to take in that information as much as possible. Just like we stated before, we're going to use mitigating circumstances to take into consideration the punishment phase and what is appropriate for this particular defendant. Now, the prosecutors do run all of the offers that they provide generally by the victim. In this situation, the victim's family. So if they offer him 10 years TDCJ, which is prison, then normally they run that past the family and make sure that the family is okay with that offer. They don't have to wait for their approval, but generally they just run it by them to see how they feel about it, and if that is something that they would be okay with. And so I definitely think that it is something that they take into consideration. But it's always up to the prosecutors every time to decide on what they will be offering. And then if they move forward in the trial setting, if they decide to go to the judge or the jury for punishment.
For people convicted of murder in Texas and in the Dallas area, in Frisco, I mean, what's typically the punishment? I know the most would be life behind bars, but realistically, how many years could he be spending behind bars in prison?
I mean, you're right. The maximum is 99 years. So many things go into consideration for that. And so when we say, well, what's realistic? Realistic is up to 99 years. And so it just really just depends on so many factors, the factors of what comes out in the discovery, what comes out in the mitigating circumstances that we talked about. What is, was he about to go to college? What was the heat of the moment situation? And that's really the defense job, to try to work with the state and try to reduce that time as much as possible. So I don't want to say there's a specific number, because every case is different. And so it just really depends, case by case.
And just lastly, Bridget, as someone who deals with cases with people accused of crimes that were heat of the moment crimes, they weren't career criminals. I was on the street reporter for a good part of my career, and so many of the murders that I've covered, someone just felt disrespected over something that just wouldn't matter 15 minutes from now. And yet they make a decision, heat of the moment, someone loses their life, and then they spend the rest of their life in prison. How do we get past that? How do we deal with these situations so we don't have stories like this where someone like Austin Metcalf loses his life?
Really, the only way is education. Educating individuals on what is important for self-defense, one, understanding what self-defense is, but then also, how do we really control our emotions? How do we control our anger and be able to tell someone effectively that they're bothering us, or making sure that we stop whatever the behavior is without escalating it to bringing a knife in a physical argument. But also, I feel like a combination of education on what self-defense is, educating ourselves on the laws of our state, and then also controlling anger management, controlling exactly what it is, how we portray our feelings, our emotions when we're in public settings.
So well put. And educating yourself about the laws in each state is such an important part that people really should take up. Bridget Williams, trial attorney, joining us from Dallas, Texas. Thanks as always for being on Law and Crime.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll continue to follow this story as the criminal case plays out. For On the Case, presented by Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.